Hello everyone, and welcome to Right Wing Rising. Please be sure to like this video down below before you are finished watching, and subscribe to the channel if you are new. So the state of focus in today's 240ToWin installment is the state of Indiana. And this is a state that is pretty reliably Republican, especially in recent years. But there are still some interesting races to talk about, and it is worth giving some attention to the fact that the state is moving in a positive conservative direction overall. First, looking at the state of the presidential race in the state of Indiana. The Hoosier state has only voted blue once in the last 60 years. That was, of course, in 2008 when Obama narrowly beat McCain, but it was a massive upset win in the state. Of course, it immediately swung back to the right, with Romney winning the state by 10, 4 years later in 2012, also against Obama. But then in 2016, Trump made the entire Midwest region redder, and Indiana was no exception, especially since he picked the governor of that state to be his running mate, so that helped out as well, and Trump improved to a 19-point margin of victory, almost doubling Romney's margin of victory. And he got 56.9% of the vote, almost cracking 57, which he did in 2020, even though his margin of victory fell to 16 points. And this is not surprising because over 70% of the state population is white, over 70% of the state population is Christian, and a large majority of the working population is working and middle class. All three demographic groups being very favorable to Republicans in the Trump era. The national popular vote went to Biden by 4.5 percentage points. Considering that 2020 was an ideal year for Democrats, and it being expected to swing back toward Republicans this year, with it being more likely that Harris narrowly wins the popular vote by 2 points or less, or maybe Trump even is able to pull off the first Republican national popular vote win since 2004. But either way, the country is not going to be as democratic as it was in 2020 with Biden at the helm of the ticket. Therefore, if the nation swings to the right by 2 to 3 points, Indiana is likely to give Trump 60% of the vote, a mark that even Bush in 2004 was unable to crack in the state. And Trump's path to making the state even redder than his 19-point win in 2016 and getting 57% of the vote in 2020 is pretty clear. He needs to flip back the county that houses the city of Lafayette and gain the St. Joseph County in the northern part of the state. And he needs to narrow Harris's margin of victory in the Indianapolis metro area. He also needs to make Lake County much closer. 3/4 of the population in that county is black, but it is a big working class county. And it also has the distinction of housing the country's largest integrated mill located in the city of Gary, operated and owned by U.S. Steel. Considering that the working class and manufacturing is synonymous with Trump's platform and voters that he targets and does well with, given his policies, this is an area of the state that he very well could improve in, since he's running a campaign much more akin to the 2016 one that he ran rather than 2020, since he is running much more on the economy and immigration and focusing on the working and middle class, and the bread and butter policies of his, such as bringing manufacturing jobs back home from abroad. Given that Trump is going to be hammering home his policy proposals that would provide solutions to the problems with the economy and at the southern border in the coming weeks and months ahead of Election Day in the Rust Belt region, of which 2 neighboring states of Indiana, Michigan, and Ohio are a part of, you can very much bet that this message of policies that would benefit the middle and working classes will reach northwestern Indiana, the part that borders Michigan, a key swing state that Trump is heavily targeting. And if that happens, it will not only help Trump's margin of victory in the state, it will also help down ballot, since this county is a part of the 1st congressional district in the state. a district that Republicans are hoping to gain into their column. The incumbent Democratic representative is Frank Mervyn, who was first elected in 2020 by a 16-point margin and over 50,000 votes. But after redistricting, this seat got a little bit more Republican, and as a result, Mervyn only won by 5.5 points and only 12,000 votes in the 2022 midterms. His opponent this time, the Republican nominee, Randy Niemeyer, had almost $500,000 on hand to spend based on the last campaign reporting to the FEC, which is not bad against an incumbent who has raised $1.5 million. Believe it or not, being outspent by a 3-to-1 margin against the sitting congressman is actually not that bad. And Niemeyer performed well in the primary, getting over 60% of Republican voters, so he fairly well united the Republican Party in the district behind him. It was not too much of a divisive primary, and all of the Republican candidates combined in the primary got only 1,000 less votes than Mervyn did in the Democratic primary. So with Trump being at the top of the ticket, pushing policies that should be pretty popular with many people in the district, and making gains in the polls since 2020 with black voters, a key voting bloc if Republicans want to win this seat, if Niemeyer runs on Trumpian policies and can make inroads with African Americans and working class voters, he very well could pick up a House seat for Republicans. This is definitely a race to watch on election night. And since Indiana has gotten redder in recent years, flipping this seat would only solidify Republicans' growing influence in the state. Democrats at one point controlled the governorship for over 15 years, including for the entirety of the 1990s. But Republicans won it back in 2004 and have never looked back since. Democrats even had control of the state legislature for the majority of the time until the 2000s, when the GOP then gained control of the state house in 2004, but it took all the way until the 2010 midterms for them to gain control of the state Senate. But since that point, they have held on to both branches ever since, and now boast a commanding 40-10 majority in the state Senate and a 70-30 majority in the state House, where they could even pick up some seats this coming fall. And one of the current senators from the state, Mike Braun, is this year's GOP nominee for governor. Now, he is not perfect on every issue, but he is still one of the best senators. He agreed with Trump's economic policies. He was strong on immigration. He has not been a neoconservative on foreign policy, like someone such as Lindsey Graham is. He has voted much more in line with Trump's stances when it comes to that issue. And he also has been a big, staunch opponent of giving foreign aid to other countries, specifically giving it to Ukraine over the last 3 years, when many GOP senators bent over backwards to join hands with the Democrats and vote with open arms to give Ukraine insane sums of money, really whatever they wanted. And he's been very socially conservative on cultural and moral issues. He even has a solid healthcare policy and was a vocal leader against the vaccine mandates when that was a thing Biden was pushing in 2021. And he will be a big upgrade over the current governor, Eric Holcomb, who was Mike Pence's lieutenant governor running mate in 2016. I will give Holcomb credit for being a social conservative on policy, but he acted much closer to that of a Democrat than a Republican in his handling of COVID restrictions in the state in 2020. He had a weak response to the riots in the summer of 2020, when the Black Lives Matter fever was at its peak, and he opposed stopping private companies from implementing a vaccine mandate for their employees. I get that normally you would not want the government butting its nose in and telling private companies what they can and can't do, but when private companies are stepping on individuals' basic freedoms, such as making choices about their own health and body, you know, the whole "my body, my choice" slogan that liberals like to use for abortion, but somehow didn't apply in this case. So for those reasons, Eric Holcomb was really not the best governor and was pretty weak and left a lot to be desired. So Mike Braun will definitely be an upgrade in the places that Holcomb let conservatives and Republicans down. Mike Braun has only served one term in Senate. He won election to a first term in 2018, beating the Democrat incumbent by about 6 points to flip that Senate seat. As such, he would be up for re-election this fall, but since he is retiring, that leaves the seat open. The Republican nominee to replace him is Jim Banks, who is the sitting congressman in the 3rd Congressional District of Indiana. During his time in Congress, which has only been a couple of years, he has been a leader against big tech and censorship. He is the highest rated Indiana representative on Numbers USA, which ranks the immigration voting record of members of Congress. So he's been strong on that issue. And he was even censored for a period of time by Twitter in 2021 for speaking out against Biden's transgender health secretary. You know that when a conservative politician was being censored by Twitter in the early days of the Biden administration before Elon Musk bought it out, that they were doing something right. So that honestly says a lot of good things about Jim Banks. The fact that he joined the likes of Donald Trump in being censored. Like Mike Braun, he did not vote to give Ukraine billions and billions of dollars in foreign aid. And he is also, like Mike Braun, strong on social issues. Trump gave him an early endorsement to clear the field and make sure that he did not have a divisive primary, and make sure that he did not have to waste millions of dollars trying to win just the primary. And the good news is that Republican voters are not even losing another conservative voice in the House, because the Republican nominee to replace Jim Banks in his Congress seat is the former U.S. Representative Marlin Stutzman, who is a former House Freedom Caucus member. He retired in 2016 to unsuccessfully run for the Senate seat that was up in Indiana that year. But he is back. He decided to come out of retirement and run for Congress, and he won the primary. And he will replace Jim Banks in that very Republican seat in the 3rd Congressional District. The only somewhat competitive, high-profile, statewide race in Indiana this year is going to be found at the Attorney General level. The incumbent, Todd Rokita, won election to a first term in 2020 by almost 17 points, cracking 58% of the vote. So looking at just the past electoral result for this candidate, you would not expect this race to be close 4 years later. However, he got national attention for pursuing punishment of a doctor that performed abortion on a minor in the state. And while I do not know all of the facts of this case, and cannot speak as a legal expert because I am not, from a casual observer, Rokita seems justified in his actions to go after this doctor legally, arguing that she violated state laws, which include patient privacy since she went on national media and talked about the abortion that she performed, and also because she did not follow state reporting mandates surrounding child abuse. Whereas the response to this case by the media and other pundits seemed to be purely emotional rather than talking about the legal merits of his case. And while this controversy has made Democrats want to target this race to take him out, hoping that they can capitalize on their favorite issue of abortion in this election and make him seem controversial or extreme or just a bad guy, and convey that image of him to enough independent and moderate Republican voters to be able to pull off an upset in Indiana. But Democrats have not won a statewide race since 2012. And that is why, of all the elections happening in Indiana, this one has Democrats' full attention in the state, because they see it as a rare chance to pick off a state office. But this feels remarkably similar to what happened in the election for Secretary of State of Indiana in the 2022 midterms. And funny enough, the Democratic nominee in that election is also the Democratic nominee this time around for Attorney General against Todd Rokita. Election outlets had the Secretary of State race in 2022 listed as a toss-up, and the polls even showed Democrats winning the race. But on Election Day, when the actual results came in, the Republican nominee won 54% of the vote and claimed victory by a 14-point margin, despite being controversial as Democrats attacked him for being a 2020 election conspiracy theorist. Still, the partisan lean of Indiana carried the Republicans to victory in this race. And I expect something similar to happen in this election for Attorney General. I think it will be closer than the Republican victories at the governor, Senate, and presidential levels in the state, but use history as a barometer that just because the polls and election pundits say that this is going to be a competitive election doesn't mean it will be so. It could be within 10, it could be around 10, but I still expect Todd Rokita to win re-election and do so by a comfortable margin. He's been a solid attorney general. The political establishment in the state is not a fan of Rokita. They even tried to find a challenger for him at the convention to remove him as the nominee, but that didn't work. And Rokita is a Trumpian figure in policy and rhetoric. Crime has dropped under his tenure. He's a social conservative who has targeted the indoctrination in schools, inappropriate content being exposed to children online. He has taken on the Biden administration's federal overreach, and he has been based on election reform and COVID restrictions in 2021. So I really hope there are no surprises and he gets reelected because he is a solid AG. The only other race that might be slightly competitive beside the Attorney General race, and of course the House election in the 1st Congressional District, is going to be found in the 5th Congressional District of the state. Victoria Spartz, the incumbent, won a tough primary showdown that she barely survived. In early 2023, she announced that she was retiring, but a year later, in February of this year, she suddenly switched and said she was actually running for re-election again, which put her in an odd position since Republican candidates were already running in the district as if it was an open seat because she had announced she was retiring and they had gained support and funding. Given that fact, she was only able to get by a handful of points, not even able to crack 40% of the Republican electorate that showed up on primary election day. Since it was a divisive primary, that fact might affect the general election, since she blew most of her campaign cash to just win the primary. However, this is a very Republican seat. It used to be a toss-up swing district, but it got much redder after redistricting. Trump won this seat by 16 in 2020, and Victoria Spartz won it by 22 in the 2022 midterms. However, I expect her to get a margin of victory not over 20 points this time. Expect it to be closer to 15 points. Despite the confusion of her retiring then unretiring, she is actually a pretty solid congresswoman. Despite being the only Ukrainian-born member of Congress, she has been very critical of Zelensky, the Ukrainian government at large, and giving foreign aid to that country. She is also good on immigration and most other issues, and I expect her to win re-election even if it will be marginally closer. To wrap up, the good news about Indiana is it's getting more conservative, and that is being reflected in the real world by the legislation that is being passed, ever-growing majorities in the state legislature, expanding Republican influence across all political spectrums in Indiana, and also more solid elected officials being nominated to different offices. They have a great attorney general. Mike Braun will be a huge upgrade over the current governor, Eric Holcomb. Jim Banks replacing Braun in that Senate seat makes sure that a conservative is not lost in the Senate, and he himself is being replaced by a strong conservative, perhaps even stronger, in Marlin Stutzman in his House seat. So conservatives really got their cake and ate it too this primary cycle in Indiana. The demographics of the state favor Republicans, in addition to the state being made up 80% by rural areas and farmland. All of these factors favor Republicans electorally, and that is reflected very starkly by only 4 to 5 counties in the state going blue, and all of the Republican and rural counties shifting dark red in recent years. Expect Mike Braun to be elected the next governor and Jim Banks the next senator by at least 15 to 17 points, if not more. Look for the Attorney General to hold on despite media controversy, and watch out for Trump possibly cracking 60% in the state and Republicans even picking up the 1st Congressional District, which would be a huge win for their House majority. In all aspects, Indiana is getting redder, more Republican, and more conservative, and that is a very good thing for the policies that will be rolled out and the culture of the state going forward.